Hi, and welcome to the Bring Me My Books podcast. I'm Christy Kane, and I'm here with my co-host, Travis Lowe. And, Travis, we normally start off by talking about where we are and what we're doing. And so I'm going to let you do that because we're in a pretty cool place for a pretty great reason. So.
Yeah. We are in Bluefield, West Virginia for the Hope Words Writers Conference, and I couldn't be more excited about this. We're currently in the Ramsey School, the Gary Bowling's House of Art, which is an incredible building here in the middle of an incredible little city in West Virginia. The Writers Conference starts in tomorrow, just a few hours, so we're getting everything set up and we're shooting several episodes, and it's going to be a fun weekend.
It is. I kind of can't believe that I'm so glad that you were willing to do this here. I think it's a lot of fun, but that you're in charge of the Writers Conference and that you're taking a few hours to do our podcast is pretty amazing.
It is a wild time right now. So.
Yes. Well, we're back with our second book of the year, and this book is Pentecost by Emilio Alvarez, and we're hoping, especially if you haven't started reading it, you have plenty of time. It's a short book, but right in time for the season of Pentecost, leading up to Pentecost. And I've learned a lot about this Christian holiday, this Christian season through this. So let's just jump in. We're going to do the first couple. We're going to go up to chapter 2 in this episode. And then with the next episode, we'll finish the book. So 2 episodes for this book if you're reading along with us. So anyway, so Travis, just jump in. Maybe if there's something either overall from these first 2 chapters or even the introduction.
Sure. We kind of picked this book because we know Esau McCauley, and he was the one that did this series, and it's on lots of the seasons of the church, and they're really cool books. But we come from kind of a Pentecostal background, but also an appreciation of the broadness of the Christian church. And that's one of the things that I appreciated about this book is he's speaking as a Pentecostal, but he's speaking outside of just the Pentecostal church to talk about this season that is, he says, one of the oldest seasons in the history of the church. So it was really, really neat to dive into this. It was neat for me as a Pentecostal who has focused on the teachings of Pentecost, but I haven't really focused as much on the season of Pentecost to see how the church over the last couple thousand years has endeavored to live into that experience, to journey through that season. So it was really cool. One of the things that I loved just kind of in the beginning was that he talks about 3 different names for this feast. Mm-hmm. And the Christian season is usually set up around these times of feasting and fasting that commemorates stories throughout the Bible to help us live into the narrative of the Bible story, the story of grace and faith. But he talks about the Pentecost season having kind of 3 different names, the feast having 3 different names, one being the Feast of 50 Days. And I love that because we know the verse, at the fullness of time, when the time had fully come, the Holy Spirit came, but a lot of times I focus on like that moment.
Yes.
But there was this 50 days of preparation and this pilgrimage, and the way that he talks about them 50 days, I loved it. I learned things at the church during that 50 days that you would never bow. There was this standing in our faith, standing for our prayers, kind of bold faith, like victorious, but also a standing against the world, like this righteous standing in faith. And the idea of the pilgrimage, like we're on a journey to what the Spirit's doing. I think sometimes I've been guilty of like wanting something like right then. Maybe that's our culture, but it shows us that Pentecost isn't always like, it comes in that rushing, but that rushing was preceded by waiting and the journey.
Yeah, which makes me think in that part, it hit me. I think about the seasons of Advent and Lent as being seasons of waiting.
Right.
And you're waiting for this big event. And I have always, and I grew up in the Pentecostal tradition as well, but then I've spent a lot of time in the liturgical traditions too,
Yeah.
Anglican in particular, and so it was interesting. So I've seen it celebrated, but it's always, even then, I don't know if it was just my understanding of what was going on, but I just focused on the day, and you're going back to these 50 days, and I thought it's like
I just always thought that was Easter season. Like it never occurred to me that we were talking about these 50 days as a time of preparation leading up to, in a similar way that Lent and Advent were. And so, yeah, I just wanted to throw
that in there. I loved that. I thought it was just super interesting.
And it's this pilgrimage towards heaven, towards the fullness of God, towards the eschaton, as heaven comes down, because that was what happened at Pentecost. It was this coming down of heaven, not something that we could build up, not something that we could do on our own, but a gift from God that came down. But it was a place where heaven and earth touched, like this overlap. And that idea of standing makes me think of that too. Like, we're on the other side of the resurrection. Mm-hmm. We're after Easter. So the waiting that we're doing here is a different kind of waiting.
It is, yes.
Than what you see like in Advent. And so it's a waiting in victory.
Yes. Oh, it's like a celebratory waiting.
Yeah. And waiting for the fulfillment of what he's doing, waiting for the fullness of time, for the time to fully come.
Yeah, which made me, when I hear you say that, and I think about how I always celebrated that season of that 50 days, especially when we were in the Anglican church, those 50 days were the Easter season.
Yeah.
And it was very celebratory.
Yeah.
So it is I think that's a good point. It's a different kind of waiting.
Yeah. It's not the waiting in darkness. Mm-hmm. It's not the waiting in almost like despair that you have kind of in the, some of the other seasons, because it's almost like, the leading up to Easter. We don't say hallelujah. We don't want to do anything that declares victory, but Pentecost is a season of victory. Yeah. It's this, but I think it's also mixed with this humility, knowing that the fullness hasn't yet come. So there's the waiting in that, but it's a waiting from a place of victory. And then he says that it's a feast of first fruits, which I think is beautiful, because Jesus talks about his resurrection as this first fruit. And that's a promise to us that if he raised, we're going to raise. And that he's the first taste, the foretaste of glory, I heard somebody say one time that was like going into Baskin Robbins, and they have those little tiny spoons. They're like, you want to try a taste of it? Yeah. And like, I want to try a taste of all of them. Yes, and you get the foretaste of what's to come, and you know what you're going to order because of that. But that Pentecost season, that Pentecost experience, that there is a moment in that. There's something that you hold on to, and it's this taste of what is to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the final one, he said that it was a feast of harvest. And all of these feast names came out of the Old Testament. And I think that's what's so wild is this was all being given to them under a different understanding, not a full understanding of what was to come, but how they were reshaped after the resurrection and repointed into this fullness of what Jesus had accomplished. But we definitely see Pentecost as this harvest time. Yeah. You're given power to go and tell, to go and do something. But all of these feasts had been practiced for hundreds of years with nobody really knowing what it would look like on the other side of the resurrection. And now we get to walk in these same feasts and these same times from the other side of the resurrection and see the harvest and see the first fruits and see the 50 days in a different light than what they did before. Absolutely. So I think I really loved that in the first couple chapters of the book.
Yeah, I thought that was fantastic. I'm going to take a step back real quick.
Yeah.
Because I just realized that even in the preface, it talked about how this series, part of why this series is appealing to the broader church, because we talked about how we grew up in the Pentecostal tradition, and then we both, for different reasons, have found ourselves engaging in the church calendar. This I haven't. You don't know I'm going to ask you this question, but I just want your opinion. Why do you think that the church calendar has experienced the popularity among Christians? Because I was talking to a friend who is not. She's not Pentecostal, and she's not Anglican. She's certainly not Catholic, but she, and she's fascinated by the church calendar. I don't know. Do you have thoughts on why? And if not, that's okay.
My thought, we live in a society that is so much about personal identity. This is who I am, finding the true me and all of this. And I think that we've almost oversaturated that. Like it's like it's gone so far.
Yeah.
And I think people are looking for something that kind of pulls them out of just themselves. And I think that the church calendar has a way of reminding us that it isn't just about me. Like it isn't just my story. Like it's a way to live in to a story that's much larger than you.
Yeah.
And I don't know that our society gives us very many of those opportunities.
Yeah.
When I can't remember the way that G.K. Chesterton said it, but he basically said when everything's about us, that's an awful small story.
Yeah.
There just isn't much there. And so much of our society tells us that it's all about us. And I think so many of us have been let down.
Yeah.
But when we're invited to live into this broad story that is so unimaginable, so crazy, so true,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of interest in our world for an opportunity to kind of.
Yeah. I think that's good, and I think that's right. One of the things that was so appealing to me, I remember about when we first started attended the Anglican church when we lived outside of Chicago, was that we were saying the same words. I knew that Sunday morning that people all over the world, Christians all over the world were saying, in whatever season of the church we were participating in. So were those people all over the world.
Yeah. And
so I do think that's right. We know that we're all part of the family of God, but it gives us like a tool. It's not, it's not necessarily
in the Bible that you have to practice Lent and you have to do all these things, but it gives us
it's a spiritual discipline, I think, to work through the church calendar.
Yeah.
And to enter into that is to be, in some ways, recognizing that we're looking at time in an alternate way.
Right.
Where this is God's time. And I think that's good. You really got me thinking, as you probably can tell. But I think that's good.
Esau, who edited the series, he was talking about Lent a few weeks ago. I heard him, and he said it's not about all the rules, and it's not about doing things right, and we can just try to live into the season. And he said, give yourself grace because we made all of this up anyways.
Right.
It's all been kind of made up, but it's just ways to remind us of the story. And so it may look different for everybody. And I had somebody ask me just a couple of days ago, they said, what led you to be interested in this? And I said, well, to be honest with you, I'm interested in the broad spectrum of Christianity. I love going into churches of different backgrounds and different looks and just see the ways that people are keeping the story alive. I just love it.
Yeah, and it's like you said, these forms that we're taking on, it's not because they're in Scripture. A lot of it, we'll get to culture making. We could probably intertwine that, but we'll get to that conversation later today.
Yeah. A lot later for you, but later today.
And so a lot of that is cultural, but
to see these different expressions, and that kind of leads us to.
I think we could talk a little bit about his discussion of Babel and the diversity of the church, and that's in the second chapter, especially on page 36. If you're where he begins talking about living as a multilingual community. What were your thoughts on Pentecost, the connection with Pentecost and either Babel or that multilingual community?
That's something I've been fascinated in for a long time. We'll read some in Culture Making about it, and I still don't know that I've got a firm grasp on all of it. But there's definitely a connection between the two. And I've always wrestled with what was it that they were doing in Babel that was so bad that God had to do this. And I think in these two books, it kind of talks about that their focus was on getting rid of their dependence of God. Let's build it so high that we don't need God. That it's all about us, that people will see us and talk about us. And Acts was this other humble place, this humility, that it's all about God. And one quote, I know we probably need to take a break here in just a second, but it says, this was page 32, God does not give everyone the ability to speak one language as much as he empowers humanity to understand each other through other languages. And that's kind of where he goes into the other faith traditions. And that's something that I would love, as Pentecostals, as someone with a Pentecostal background, I would love to be thought of as the person who helps us understand each other. Like, how cool would that be that that's the way that you're defined? Like,
Very cool.
we are the people who understand the other languages,
Absolutely. Okay, you made a good point. We'll stop for a break here. We'll hear a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be right back.
LifeSprings Resources is committed to providing innovative learning resources for the local church. Our products reflect our commitment to the development of new and innovative ways to experience scriptural truth. Whether you're looking for material for your small group, need new curriculum for Sunday school, or you're just trying to stock up on church supplies, we've got you covered. Look for us online at lifespringsresources.com or call us at 1-800-541-1376, and our friendly customer service team will be happy to assist you. Situated in Bluefield, West Virginia, the Hopewards Writers Conference seeks to equip and encourage their patrons to tell stories of hope. This year's conference will focus on the question of living between cultures and the unique potential it holds for creativity. The conference will offer many exciting guest author speakers this year, and can't wait to learn what God has been speaking into their lives. Come with us and help us tell stories of hope.
Welcome back to Bring Me My Books. Travis, we've been talking about the second chapter in Pentecost, and I think during our break, you were saying something that I was hoping you would kind of kick us off with.
Yeah, I think it's so great here where he's talking about speaking in tongues. And he's talking about it in a broader sense of being able to just let's learn to understand each other. Maybe we talk different, maybe we've grown up different, maybe we see things different, or we worship different, let's learn to understand each other, because tongues was never supposed to be about not being understood, and I think a lot of times when people think of tongues, they're thinking of, this crazy, I don't understand, that kind of thing. Yeah. And a pastor friend of mine, he was actually a pastor of a church in Poland, and he told me about his experience as he was actually a Catholic believer and came into Pentecost, was filled with the Spirit. And he said that experience for him of being filled with the Spirit and speaking in other tongues wasn't about confusion, which he had always thought that it was. He said really in that moment, he felt like it was the first time in his life that he was understood. Like that he was talking to God. And that God was with him, and that God knew him. And God knows us more than anybody knows us. I think of that picture of when we get to heaven and he talks about having a name for us that nobody else knows. There's more about us that he knows. And he said it was an experience of being known and being understood that Pentecost was about, more so than not being understood, that we've kind of made it about. And, different church traditions think of Pentecost as different things. Right. And a lot of times when people talk of Pentecostals, it's like that idea of, well, it's just this craziness and it's not understandable. But that's not the heart of what Pentecost is. And it may be a language that people don't understand, and maybe that's what it sounds like, but I believe underneath all of that, it's this recognition that God is present, that God is here, and that God knows us and He understands us, and actually that He wants to unite us with people that we don't understand.
Yeah.
You know?
And kind of going back to Babel, one of the things that I feel like I'm taking away from these first 2 chapters, if I think about it, especially with the whole idea of that it's a day of, and a season leading up to a day of power, is that the power is not, it's not ours. I mean, and it's that it's a gift from God, and it's really a return to dependence on Him. And that's where you kind of, I think there's so many neat overlaps with Pentecost. With Pentecost and the Tower of Babel that we could probably, explore in depth, and I'm sure he could probably explore in a lot more depth. But just that it's with even with all the language, all that it's still all about Him, and it's about this fullness of Him to His church and to His people. I like that idea that He said He was seen, because He sees us. He has not forgotten us. Even when Christ went away and He said, "But I'm gonna send." Like I am with you. It's just that constant with us. Okay, so the last thing I wanted us to talk about is, and we both have mentioned that we liked this idea of being pilgrims versus being a tourist. And he talks about this in the introduction. And so I think the way I would love for us to consider this idea is for people who are, right now, we're in this time. Like, this is the church season. Even as you and I are speaking, is this preparation time leading up to Pentecost. What did you get from this book? Like, how do we engage as pilgrims and not merely tourists, regardless of the church tradition that we're from? So not like, whether we're Anglican or Orthodox or Pentecostal, those are the ones that we traditionally think of. But for any Christian, how do we become pilgrims, do you think?
I think there's a lot here, but if I were to answer that, I'd love to answer it with a book. Eugene Peterson's book, A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, is incredible, talking about that.
We might should do that.
But I love this quote on page 11. It talks about pilgrimage as it's power given to us so that we might become children of God. So that's almost like a reversal of power. You imagine kids not having much power. So it's a power given to us to be children, strangers, pilgrims journeying towards our heavenly eternal home. So there's this sense, if you read just that statement, there's a sense at the beginning of power. He's giving us power to become children and strangers, to become the least powerful as we journey to our eternal heavenly home, which is this place of great power and great fulfillment. So like kind of everything about the story of Jesus is this turning upside down, but it's a turning upside down of power.
Upside down kingdom, right. Yeah.
And I think to journey in that, to become pilgrims, we choose to stand and not bow. But we stand with a humility of children and strangers.
Yeah, that's good. And that even goes back to that whole the eye of dependence. Like the idea of it is a season of, in some ways, being confident and celebrating. Yeah. But this recognition that we are absolutely dependent, like children and strangers. That's great. Well, anything else you want to say about these first 2 chapters, or we can...
I think we're good.
Okay, I think we are. All right. Well, we have to end, though. We have to end with our books and our cloaks. Yeah. So 2 Timothy 4:13, we're always talking about what's your book and what's your cloak. So real quickly, we'll just pick one of the 2, and then you share one, I'll share one, and then we'll be out.
Yeah. So on the trip here to Bluefield, I was listening to a book that was recommended by one of the folks in our Bring Me My Books Wednesday post about books. Barry Smith recommended How to Stay Married.
Oh, I recently listened to that.
Okay, I've listened to the first 6 or 7 chapters on the way here, and that's been really good so far. So that's what I'm reading.
That's fun. I probably finished that also on Barry's recommendation. So when we say, if you're on Facebook, when we say we read what your posts are and we really want to know what you're reading, like we really do want to know what you're reading. I have another friend, I've got her book on hold at the library. Actually, two people, one I know and one person I don't know, personally. But yeah, I think that's great. So I would say mine is, and this is a musical that you've seen recently too. We both saw The King of Pangea.
Oh, yeah.
There was a musical that was done by the State Theater of Oklahoma. Yes, the State Theater of Oklahoma. It's a brand new musical. Our state was the first one to be able to run it, and it was just fantastic. Oh. And I'm like trying to find the music from it. I have been searching.
Gracie said the same thing. She's like, I want the soundtrack.
Oh, I can't wait for it to come out like on Spotify or something like that. But I have been, even the clips that they have, such a beautiful story, and really coming off the Amanda Helda Opelt's book on grief. And it is a story of a boy who, I mean, in short, loses his mom and his journey back towards hope, I would say. And so I've still been thinking about that and just loved that musical. And I know you and Gracie saw it too. I saw it with my daughter. So that would be my book right now. So, yeah. All right. Well, thank you for joining us. We're always grateful to be able to talk about these wonderful books and have you be a part of the Bring My Books community. And next time we'll be talking about the second half of Pentecost. Thanks.